A fight for their own independence, Mozambicans faced the European giant Portugal, who had ruled over their country for longer than 4 centuries with fierce oppression. The fight that ensued took many lives, with the Portuguese army being deployed to try squash the liberation movement. Ultimately, this violence was reflected onto the people of Mozambique, with stories of villages being massacred, anecdotes of mass shootings, children being burnt alive, and executions of anyone who was suspected of working with the revolution movement. I will be discussing the events and horrible stories that symbolise this event. Welcome to Mobrid Memoirs. Please drop a like and a sub below if you want to tune in for more. In 1498, the first Portuguese explorers landed on the shores of the Mozambique coastline in West Africa. By the 16th century, the Portuguese had expanded many of their colonies in Africa, with present-day Guinea-Bissau, Angola and Mozambique being among them. There was no real administrative powers, as the settlers were mostly individuals who were in the trade of slaves and gold. After Portugal came to heads with England about African territory, they were forced to concede land, and in 1881, with the modern-day Mozambique borders being set up. The Gaza Empire, a dominant tribe in Mozambique, were defeated by Portugal in 1895, and by 1902 all of the remaining inland tribes were defeated too. The Portuguese set up the capital of Lourenço Marques, now called Maputo. By 1951, tensions were rising in Mozambique, due to the mistreatment of the indigenous people and the encouragement of a nationalist sentiment. There was a large disparity of wealth between the wealthy Portuguese and rural indigenous people, with few opportunities to help them join urban modern life. The government forced the Mozambican farmers to grow rice or cotton for export. They pressured over 250,000 workers to go mine in neighbouring territories for gold and coal. This is reflected in 30% of the black underground miners at the time being from Mozambique, showing their exploitation exerted by the Portuguese. The Portuguese suppressed unions and left-wing opposition, sending members to exile in hopes of stopping the independence movement. Due to these exiles, it was hard to start a movement in Mozambique itself. However, in Tanzania on the 25th of June 1962, sociologist Eduardo Mondlane set up the Mozambican Liberation Front, or FRELIMO. They heavily publicised the struggle for independence, catching international attention and receiving support from the West and the East. It was mainly left countries that supported the movement in a bid to disrupt the Western colonies. The Soviet Union helped supply FRELIMO with training in subversion, political warfare and military aid. For example, in 1972, the Soviet Union sent shipments of 122mm artillery rockets. As support rose for the FRELIMO, war broke out within the country in September 1964. They made up just 7,000 combatants, which was small compared to the gigantic Portuguese army. This forced them to take up guerrilla tactics, with groups operating in 10 to 15 members. These groups would ambush patrols, sabotage communication lines and make hit-and-run attacks. FRELIMO relied on the local populace for support. In doing so, this caused the Portuguese to carry out attacks on the people. One of the first events that could be seen as a key turning point for the independence movement and a trigger for the Mozambican War of Independence was the Mueda Massacre. On March of 1959, a letter from 4 migrants hailing from neighbouring territories was sent to the Portuguese consul. It asked for the Portuguese government to allow all Macondes to return to Mozambique from Tanganyika, modern-day Tanzania, calling it a land full of miseries. In 1960, 3 groups went to the door of the administration building of Mueda to protest the independence. The first 2 were flogged and arrested, but not the third. On 16th of June 1960, a public meeting was announced. Thousands gathered with placards stating Uhuru, which means freedom or independence. 2 of the migrant leaders, Faustino Vanomba and Mateus Shabiliti Waduvani, were summoned for discussions in the admin building. The discussions asked for the independence of Mozambique and that they did not wish to return to the neighbouring states where they had been placed. The governor decided to arrest the leaders as they did not come back to Mozambique without permission. He also ordered a platoon of soldiers stationed 2 miles away to assist in dealing with the crowd. When the governor announced that the leaders were to be detained, the crowd was in uproar, throwing mud and stones at the administrative building. This escalated further as the leaders were forced into a jeep, which the crowd surrounded and stopped from moving. An old man went to attack the governor with a bicycle pump, and another came to stab him with a knife. The man with the knife was shot in the head by one of the sepoys, an Indian-hired soldier. He thumped to the ground, and the sepoys fired another shot into the air as a warning. At first, the crowd held back, but then advanced again. The sepoys, now poised and ready, lowered their rifles. As the outer Portuguese platoon arrived, together they opened fire on the crowd. Reports vary in the amount of people that died that day in Mueda, with the Soviet press stating that 500 were killed. FRELIMO also accounts that 600 people were killed in Mueda, with the Portuguese army using grenades and machine guns, whereas the official government reported 7 dead with 12 wounded, with the number of casualties dropping to 3 once a report had been sent back to Lisbon. It is hard to say an exact figure on the killings that day, but the Portuguese report seems very low for a full platoon and sepoys opening fire on a crowd that was made up of thousands of people. Throughout the War for Independence, FRELIMO reported on atrocities that were carried out by the Portuguese army. As FRELIMO relied on the people, the Portuguese army systematically terrorized the local population to disrupt the support for the independence movement. A report given from a missionary, Father Luis Alfonso da Costa, stated that in a small part of the province of Tete, 92 people were killed between May 1971 to March of 1972. These people had been imprisoned and interrogated, which would lead to forms of torture, including castration and mutilation. Another report from Father Leon states that he witnessed Portuguese commandos kill 4 women and 11 children with hand grenades. This was in retaliation from a death of pro-government Maconde chief that was killed by terrorists. This further reinforces the fact that Portuguese army often targeted the local populace during the war. In June of 1970, another report from a village in João in Tete province showed the cruelty of the Portuguese army. They gathered anyone they could find in the village, a total of 60 people including women and children. They told the group to dig a hole big enough for all of us to hide from bandits. The people obeyed and started digging the hole. Once some time had passed, they told the people to check if it was big enough to fit everyone in. It was not, so they were commanded to dig again. Finally, once there was enough room, the troops ordered all the group to get into the hole. They then lowered their guns and took aim, shooting all 60 Mozambicans, not letting any escape. The Portuguese troops then buried the bodies in the graves that the Mozambicans had dug for themselves. FRELIMO stated many stories that had been reported to them during the War for Independence. This could have been a propaganda ploy to try and sway the international stage in siding with the revolutionaries. However, the fact that some of these reports came from members of the church would suggest there is some legitimacy to be had. Another shocking event that happened was the massacre of Wiryamu. This was witnessed by Father Adrian Hastings and was reported in the Times. On the afternoon of the 16th December 1972, the Portuguese military bombarded and transported soldiers to the village of Wiryamu. Soldiers ransacked huts and massacred the people of the village. He recalls that they forced the villagers into the courtyard, splitting them into 2 groups, men and women. The soldiers would then indicate a person from either group to stand up and gun them down where they stood. Women and their babies that were placed on their back would be shot at the same time. One woman, Vanya, was ordered to stand up and was carrying a 9-month-old boy in her arms. She was shot, and as she fell, so did the boy. He cried as he rolled down in the dirt, and one of the soldiers shouted, "Shut up, dog." He kicked the baby's head until it stopped crying. In the courtyard, 86 of the villagers met their fate by these executions. Other soldiers were forcing people into their huts and setting them on fire, often throwing grenades inside to make sure that the victims would die. Father Hastings believes that 34 died in this way. One soldier found a woman called Sistina who was pregnant. He asked her the sex of the baby, and she replied that she did not know. He said that wouldn't be a problem and she would find out soon, as he held her down while he used his knife to open her stomach up. He then pulled out the fetus, which was still throbbing, and said, "Look, now you know." Many people were also taken out of the village to be killed, with children between the ages of 11 and 15 found by the Nyantawa River, with their heads being decapitated. The stories from Wiryamu are sickening, with the pure brutality of the Portuguese army being shown. The Portuguese government ordered an investigation that was carried out by Jorge Hardim, where he located the village and photographed remains. However, the Portuguese government disregarded this and carried out a separate military investigation that showed no evidence of the massacre. The horrors of the Mozambique struggle for independence have not been discussed enough. There are not many pictorial or video evidence of this struggle. We are left with some harrowing stories from Mueda to Wiryamu. First-hand accounts by priests show the oppression and disregard for human life that was displayed by the Portuguese army. After just under 10 years of fighting, the war came to an end on the 8th of September 1974. A ceasefire was called as back in Portugal the Coronation Revolution had seen the government overthrown. FRELIMO won their struggle for independence with the signing of the Lusaka Accord, but in the victory came another struggle. The Mozambican Civil War broke out with a struggle for power between left and right to rule within the country. They would be locked in this battle for the next 15 years with millions falling victim. However, this is a story for another day. If you like this video, please drop a like below, and if you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate if you could drop a comment and maybe make some suggestions on what I can cover next. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace out.